Hello, Bermuda. Welcome to the Understanding Disability in the Workplace panel discussion. This is being brought to you by the Ministry of Youth, Social Development, and Seniors. It is a vital conversation to address the topic of inclusivity and how disability presents itself in the workplace. We are going to have some opening remarks from the Minister, the Honorable Tanae Farbit, and then we'll get right into the discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I just want to just start by saying that as part of Bermuda commemorating the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities, which was actually on December 3rd, we thought that we would bring this panel discussion to our community, understanding disability in the workplace. The panel today consists of five panelists, and we have with us today Lisa Reed, who is the Executive Officer of the Human Rights Commission. We also have Sasha Richardson, who is the Chairwoman of the Disability Advisory Council, disability advocate, and charity consultant. We also have in the room Ms. Malika Cartwright, Director of the Department of Workforce Development, as well as Sherry Lynn Lilly, Mental Health Counselor and Executive Director of Inspire Bermuda, and Keith Simmons, Disability Advocate. I want to particularly highlight something that Lisa Reed will probably talk about today. But one of the highest reporting complaints noted in the Human Rights Commission was discrimination due to disability. Therefore, it is important that the hesitancy and fears of some of our employers to hire persons with disabilities is alleviated and they are equipped to know how to integrate disability into the workplace. Today, we will have the five panelists share a wealth of knowledge, information, experience, and key tools for employers so that they can be supportive in the workplace. I also want to let our viewers know today that I challenge everyone to partner together and share a vision for Bermuda that is inclusive for all. And in doing this, we can collectively progress towards not only achieving sustainable development goals, but we can also break down barriers as we challenge stereotypes and we create a Bermuda where persons with disabilities can fully participate and thrive. Thanks, Alicia.
So we're going to get into the panel discussion. I do want to welcome our listening audience that if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. We'll post them to our panelists as the discussion goes on. If you're watching this at a later date, you can still type your questions into the comments. We can monitor them, but be sure to share this with those in your community. First up, we're going to have Ms. Lisa Reed from the Human Rights Commission.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. Disability inclusion in the workplace is not merely a legal obligation. It is a moral imperative that underscores the principles of dignity, equality, and humanity. During our time together this afternoon, I will discuss reasonable accommodation duties and address the responsibility of employers to foster inclusive environments that honor the dignity and worth of people with disabilities. Disability in the workplace should be a fundamental employment and workplace consideration. It is not simply a disability issue or human rights issue. Disability is part of the human condition. Anyone can become disabled at any point in their life. Disability in the workplace is central to fostering an inclusive employment culture. Protection against discrimination based on disability has existed under the Human Rights Act since 1988. The Human Rights Act provides an avenue for individuals to challenge discrimination in employment on the ground of disability. Workplace rights were expanded in 2012 with the passing of the Human Rights Unreasonable Hardship Amendment Act 2011, requiring employers to provide reasonable accommodations to support qualified persons with disabilities to pursue or fulfill employment opportunities. Employers have a duty to accommodate employees with disabilities to the point of undue hardship. Reasonable accommodation refers to the process of identifying and providing modification or adjustment to a job or the work environment. This modification should enable an applicant to participate in the application process or for an employee with a disability to perform essential job functions. The process of providing accommodations may require the person seeking accommodation and the employer to work together to identify the most appropriate modifications. However, potential and existing employees are often reluctant to disclose the need for accommodation as they may fear being disqualified from a role or being treated unfairly. Employers should be proactive by promoting a safe and inclusive workplace culture by developing an environment that complies with the Human Rights Act. Reasonable accommodations may include modifying workspaces, adjusting schedules, or providing assistive technologies. By fulfilling this duty, employers contribute to a culture that values and prioritizes the needs of all employees. Dignity is a fundamental human right that should be preserved and nurtured in all aspects of life. Recognizing the dignity of employees with disabilities requires a commitment to creating spaces that allow full participation in work activities. Investing in education and training programs that raise awareness about the spectrum of disabilities can help build trust and promote a culture of understanding and acceptance. Inclusive practices embedded in recruitment, onboarding, orientation, and professional development. In conclusion, fostering disability inclusion in the workplace is a fundamental responsibility that goes beyond legal compliance. Employers must embrace this responsibility as an opportunity to build a workplace culture that celebrates diversity and holds the principles of human rights. In doing so, we create inclusive workplaces and a society that values the richness that diverse abilities bring to our collective human experience.
Thank you for that. I don't see any questions or comments as of yet. So we can move on to our next panelist, which is going to be Sasha Richardson from the Disability Advisory Council.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for including me in this conversation. Um, it will be very difficult for me to capture all that needs to be captured within this subject. Disabilities and the issues surrounding disabilities is near and dear to me. I don't know how I'm going to get all of this in, but from my experiences, I'm a parent of a special needs young adult. As mentioned, I'm the chair of the Disability Advisory Council. I support numerous disability related organizations and serve persons with disabilities through my business. So I'm very multifaceted in what goes on in disabilities in Bermuda. Lastly, which I don't always mention, I am a person as well with disabilities. Um, we see in today's world the advancement of medicine, technology, policies in Bermuda. I'll speak directly about Bermuda. And persons with disabilities are living longer. They are doing well, they are thriving, they are successful. There is a lot that has been done, and clearly we're here because there's a lot that needs to be done. To strip disability issues down to the workplace, again, will be difficult to do within an hour, but within my couple of minutes, there's just a couple of things that I would like to share from an advocacy point of view. People with disabilities can work. People with disabilities want to work. As Lisa mentioned, I think we'll probably talk about it a bit more later on. In some cases, reasonable accommodations would need to be met. will need to be made, sorry. In other cases, it may simply be just talking, sitting down and talking with a potential employee. One thing I do want to note is that within the progression of medicine and technology, we are also seeing the increase of persons developing or becoming disabled, whether it's through an illness or accident. So that dynamic, sorry, is also changing in the workplace based on people who were maybe yesterday able and due to some issue now unable or disabled, sorry. Um, I want to start real quick to people with disabilities. Advocate, advocate, advocate your family, your parents, your child, yourself. I did a quick interview, and I'm not going to even go through all of them, but people with disabilities, generally, you'll find it anywhere, with and without, want to be able to work. They want to be able to support their families, they want to contribute to society. Um, and it's not that all of them or us don't work or can't work, but it is not comparable to the population at large. What could be done for a person with disabilities on their end? I'm not sure that well, workforce development is here and does provide support in that area. In Bermuda, we are somewhat disadvantaged. I'll use that word in regard to the policies, the laws that exist with disabilities. In the States, and Sherry may actually speak to this, when you go for a job, you do not have to disclose your disability. I do work with persons with disabilities, developing their resumes and cover letters. I actually do the opposite in Bermuda, where we talk about it, but you accentuate what you're able to do. For people with disabilities, quickly, I would say do not give up. Keep pushing. The conversation is here. The conversation started. It will continue. For employers, I want to really quickly read the benefits of hiring someone with disabilities. And again, I had a very difficult time. My desk has all these notes because I don't know where to start with this, because there's just so much that needs to be done. My hope with that would be that this conversation would not have to be a conversation in the not too distant future, because hiring a person with disabilities would just be the norm. But for an employer, what are your benefits of hiring a person with a disability? You you can recruit from a wider talent pool. You promote an inclusive workplace culture. You minimize staff turnover. And I'll actually go into detail about that. People with disabilities tend to seek stable and reliable work when looking for a job, and so tend to stay in their post longer, helping to reduce your staff turnover. You attract new customers. And there is an entity which I like to, well, I won't mention who, as there is, it's in development, but they're looking at going to businesses, and right now we're not talking about accessibility, but just how Bermuda works. When things aren't good, we all talk and we complain, we boycott, we do certain things. I'm not saying that that's always the best thing to do, but being an employer who is actively trying to engage in this conversation to hire persons with disabilities, it looks good on you. So if not do it for them, do it for yourself. There is a large entourage of persons who support people with disabilities. And it will look good for your company. Sorry, I'm so nervous doing this. Um, the next one would be not so much for Bermuda, but it does happen at the low cost of reasonable adjustments. And I think Sherry may actually speak to some accommodations a bit further, a bit later on. Just to end, because I'm not going to get through everything, I do speak often on disabilities, and I just want to add my part on something that will cover everything, including the issue of disability in the workplace. You will hear today a lot about inclusion, a lot about equality and equity. And there's something that I typically, when I do presentations and speeches on disabilities, I end with a quote from an author, that I've kind of jazzed up myself. But my wish would be that all of us would use the concepts of equality, diversity, inclusion, and equity as daily actions so they would no longer be required as concepts that we're talking about like here today. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I did have one question come in. Um, the person just wants to know, how can employers be encouraged to embrace those with disabilities in the workplace? So we
Sure,
can have you answer that.
sure. Um, I, I think I guess a simple answer would be they're human, so it shouldn't be an extra step of being able to embrace. If you get what I'm saying, they're your cousins, they're your uncles, they're whomever. There's definitely strategies. I mean, a simple Google search will bring up a lot. There is the ADS, Aging and Disability Services. There's DAC. There's charities that could provide that support. Sensitivity training is definitely needed across the board, whether it's in the workplace, in schools. Start from young. Um,
Yes, I like that.
yeah.
I like that. Yeah, so there are resources that employers can use, whether that's training, like you say, in different courses, in order to make
Yes,
this like a
absolutely.
great practice.
There's definitely within government and in the nonprofit sector where you could just reach out. I just had an entity reach out to DAC, a business, and they wanted a presentation on disabilities for their employers, which is an excellent start. So there's definitely people out there that you can reach out to.
Thank you for that, Sasha. So now we're gonna go to Miss Malika Cartwright, the Director of Workforce Development.
Good afternoon, Bermuda, and good afternoon to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Farbert, for including workforce development in this important conversation. I have to say that I think that where I want to start is that our mission at Workforce Development is to develop a resilient workforce for a sustainable community in Bermuda. And that means that we are inclusive of all persons that are looking to become employed. And we are a bridge between all of the helping services that you have here and the employer. Workforce development strives to support those who have disabilities. And I think that some persons always will go to a physical disability when speaking with persons with disabilities. But we've had some enormous success with persons who have intellectual disabilities. And we have partnered successfully to place persons in employment with reasonable accommodations, and they are successful. When I first came on board, we placed two persons in the hospitality industry, and they are still working and doing quite well. So, my message for employers is please don't be afraid of it, embrace it. Be inclusive. And if you need assistance and support with that, please contact us here at Workforce Development because we bridge the gap between the employee and the employer, and also all of the helping services and support services for persons with disabilities. I have my own personal stories with this because I have a daughter who has learning challenges and goes to a school with these beautiful young people who will one day come out into the world of work and will need to have additional support, but they're smart and they are innovative and they shouldn't be left on the side just because there's a lack of understanding. So I would encourage persons to look at what those reasonable accommodations are and look for education on how you can support and have persons who have disabilities actually be included in the workforce. Uh, I think it was Lisa who spoke about all of the different technologies that are available now. Sasha also talked about it as well. There are so many other ways that we can include persons in the workplace. And I don't want persons to think that this is a heavy lift. It is a heavy lift in some areas, but when you really look at it and you think about it, if the investment that would have to be made is probably minimal when you look at what you will gain from hiring someone who has the skill sets and the ability to be able to do the job. It just means that maybe it takes them a little bit longer, or maybe an extra step of instruction is needed in order for them to complete the task in some cases. But the work that they produce is amazing. And I think that it will be very sad to leave someone out of the workplace being able to take care of themselves and their families, because in my experience, that's all they want to do. They want to work, they want to be independent, they don't want to have to rely on others. They want to live their lives just as anyone else would. And the barrier to that is having sustainable employment so that they can do that. So, again, I want people to look at their hiring practices, talk to the HR professionals, reach out to those who have the information. Human Rights Commission, DAC. Keith Simmons and I have spoken before over the years with regards to accommodations for persons with disabilities. It's been something we've talked about for a really long time. And I think that Bermuda is much better today than it has been in, say, the last 10 or 15 years, but there is still a ways to go in some areas. But I love that everyone is in the conversation and having the conversation. And we here at Workforce Development are definitely here to bridge the gap and to support employers and potential employees who may have disabilities so that we can support and advocate on their behalf when necessary.
Thank you, Malika. So I have a question about the workforce development. With your vocational assessments are and apprenticeship program, is this available to persons with disabilities as well?
We would like to assess to make sure that we're not putting them in a situation where they can harm themselves. So it is available. We just need to make the proper assessments and also work with the right support systems for them.
Okay, and another question, what duties does an employer have if an employee develops a disability that prevents them either partially or completely from doing their employment duties?
I am not well versed on what the legalities of it are, but from a workforce development and someone who has empathy, I would think that the employer would have the conversation and find out what the limitations are currently and figure out whether or not they will need to change their duties based on what has happened, or if there is reasonable accommodation for the individual so that they can continue in the same work that they are currently doing.
Okay, and if anyone else wanted to add anything to that, please feel free. Okay, no, no worries. So we'll move along. Thank you. I'll let you know if any other questions do arise, but we're going to allow Sherry Lynn Lilly, the Executive Director at Inspire Bermuda, to share with us next. So I'll go ahead and unmute you, Sherry. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, can you hear me good?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good afternoon to the minister, to all the panelists, and to all who are participating in this conversation this afternoon. Like Sasha, I felt so overwhelmed by this topic because it is very broad and wide and deep. I'm going to talk a little bit about pathways to creating employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. I am a person that lives with total blindness. So I've walked this out quite a bit. I'm also a person who is the proud owner of my own business in Bermuda. I'm very intentional about how I live out um, my life so that it can be an encouragement to others who might be living with specific challenges. I have spent quite a few years living overseas, which I've come to really understand now was God's way, the universe's way of equipping me to come back home and be able to speak to many of these issues from a perspective of having had access to such things as reasonable accommodations and other things, but with the framework of it being legislated. And so there are laws in the United States. Now I live in both places. I'm home 6 months, I'm here 6 months. But there are laws in the United States that govern how persons with disabilities are treated in all domains of life, including in the workplace. And Sasha alluded earlier to the idea that when you go for a job interview, that you don't have to disclose, and that is correct. You're not required to disclose, but we often teach persons with disabilities how to disclose. What the employer cannot do by law is make a decision based on the disability alone. The only thing they can ask about the disability is what is the accommodation that you need for work. And so I just wanted to kind of start with that. Also, anytime we are having these conversations, I'm going to do some very foundational pieces today, and I'm going to just give you like 6 really quick bullet points on pathways. But we must always start with the idea of equity and equality for persons with disabilities. If not, we run the risks of these conversations being purely anecdotal. And that's not what we want. We want to make sure that we have enforceable ways of actually fleshing this out so that we can apply some of the strategies that we're talking about in this meeting today. So you're looking at Mrs. Legislation here. Like, I'm just really pushing that this is Inspire Bermuda's primary mandate is to push for a Bermudians with Disabilities Act, because it takes what Lisa at the Human Rights Commission has as a foundational piece of protection for persons with disabilities and broadens it so that it includes nuanced aspects of what can happen to a person when they're being discriminated against because of their disability. So let's talk about some pathways to how to create these equitable opportunities for persons with disabilities to be in the workforce. So before we can even talk about hiring, we have to talk about how are we preparing persons in Bermuda with disabilities to go to work. So number one, it's going to be education. Are we at the primary level straight through looking at our children that are living with various types of disabilities and already assessing and determining how to move them through the school system so that by the time they get to middle school and high school, they have equitable opportunity through education to begin to decide what type of career path, vocational path, trade path that they want to choose for themselves. And if I could just pause for a really quick second and acknowledge also that disability comes on a spectrum. And so we go from very mild disabilities that do not impede functioning totally, all the way to profound disabilities where a person may not necessarily be able to go out into the workforce. So keeping that in mind on this spectrum, we're generalizing because we don't have a lot of time, or I'm generalizing because we don't have a lot of time. So are we providing the educational pathway for our children, youth, young adults, and adults to be able to actually enter the workforce? Secondly, are we providing adequate support and incentives and professional development for our educators to make sure that our young people, our adults, whomever it is having access to the type of education that will allow them access to the workforce when they are ready? So that's number one, is education. Number two, college, vocational, trade, schools. So after they've moved through the lower school system, some children, again on the spectrum, may not be able to go to traditional college based on what level of ability, capability they have, right? So they may end up with a trade, or they may end up in a vocational program, or they may end up in other places where they're perfecting even one skill that many persons with disabilities, Sasha alluded to earlier, they are very steady when they go to work. If the one skill is the thing that they're good at, they'll stick to it and they'll do it. But we also have persons with disabilities like myself, where my disability had nothing to do with my intellect. It had nothing to do with my ability to learn. And so we have persons with disabilities who 100% can go the college route and come back to Bermuda with college degrees. So are we creating pathways through our educational system to ensure that persons with disabilities can acquire a workable skill? So that's the second thing that I want you to consider. Number three, once that's determined, internships, apprenticeships. I think I heard someone, I think maybe the young lady from Workforce Development mentioned this. But even before we think about apprenticeships and internships, right, we're looking at how do we determine, how do we look at, and how do we assess where this person is in terms of their workforce development, where their development skills are. Are we assigning them to a smaller business, an individual that can teach them the hands-on and that might be an apprenticeship. And then for those persons that are college bound and that may not have, impeded functioning intellectually, are we placing them in internships where they can continue to expand upon their educational goals, right? We want them to reach their educational goals. So creating apprenticeships, internships, and other methods of them getting the hands-on experience, because you will find that in many disability categories that we learn faster, easier. It makes more sense when we can put our hands in it. So that's I think that was number three. Number four, we've touched on this also, educating businesses, right? So with no legislation in place, right, we have to have another approach to how we inform our businesses. So we've already heard some of these things. Sensitivity training. Inspire Bermuda actually is in the process of finalizing our introduction to hiring a disabled person presentation. So we are another resource that you can call upon, and we will come. I personally will come into your company and share with you the benefits of hiring persons with disabilities. I can share with you what a reasonable accommodation can look like, that's already been alluded to, and also to really decrease the fear and stigma that is associated with what people misunderstand in their own minds around hiring persons with disabilities. Number five, fair and equitable pay. Are we creating policies that protect within the company, right? So we have our Human Rights Commission. We don't have Disability Act legislation, but within a company, if you're going to hire a person with a disability, then the policies that are in that company should be also making sure that they provide the support and the protection so that persons with disabilities are not being discriminated against in the workplace, that they have fair and equal pay based on the position that they are hired for, and that they have the opportunity to also move up in the company through promotion, like everybody else in the company. So really ensuring that there is fairness in the workplace is another pathway to creating this great opportunity for persons with disabilities. And the last one is where our workforce development presentation just ended, and that is the transference of skills. So not every person is born with a disability. Some people end up with a disability through accident, through illness. And I have personally encountered many, many, many stories of Bermudians who ended up with a disability due to either one of those two reasons. And the transference of skills was not what was done. That reasonable accommodation piece was not what happened. What happened was they were given a package and they were laid off. Or the company did not know how to make the accommodation or even think about the accommodation, because we have all these languages that we're using, right? Reasonable accommodation, fairness, equity, all of that. But until our workplaces really absorb, like Sasha said, as a regular part of what it is that they're doing on a day-to-day, then when a person comes into a disability by means of accident or injury or sickness, companies will continue to see the only alternative as being laying them off or making them redundant. How do we transfer skills? How do we take that thing that a person did really, really well and make it into something else that they can still do to really um, enact their professional skills, right? So, for example, one of the easiest ways of transferring skills is to take what a person was doing and put them in a position where they're now teaching others how to do it. That's a transferable. That's one way to transfer a skill, right? Moving a person that might have been working with hands on to maybe doing something uh, in terms of data entry, or but just really making sure that the person has access to keeping their dignity by continuing to work. So these are some of the pathways that we must think about, starting right at the foundation. What are we doing to prepare people? What are we doing to prepare businesses to receive persons with disabilities to be in the workplace? And so, thank you again. I'll summarize some other things at the end.
Thank you for that, Sherry. That was really great. We have a few incoming questions, so I'll just give the opportunity to answer them now, and then we'll wrap up with Mr. Keith Simmons. So the first question, so I'll pose it to the whole panel. We can take turns answering, but what are some key issues that employers have raised in hiring people with disabilities? So unmute. Okay, I can't. So I don't know if Lisa, if you want to touch on anything that's been, and Sasha, you can go first if you have an answer.
I could speak from experience.
Hmm.
For myself, when I was employed, um, or before becoming self-employed, one for me was being out of work so often due to illness. Um, Thankfully, where I was employed at the time, they were very understanding, but that was a mutual thing. I was there for so many years. I was trustworthy. I was actually often out sick, but working from home, in bed, in the hospital. But I do know that that is one thing across the board that is a concern
So
of
gaps in
employers.
employment.
Yeah, just a person being sick. It could be
Absent. Mhm.
ill, absent due to the the disability itself. Um, then there's things that go with it. A person in a wheelchair, they got a bed sore, they can't be sitting. Those type of things. That extra thought of beyond just you have a cold and you got to be out sick, or your kid is out sick. You have those too, plus the added issues that comes with the disability. So I know definitely absences are a concern um, that employers have definitely focalized when it came to persons with disabilities.
I would also say that when we talk about reasonable accommodations, like really like helping them to understand what that means, right? Because it's because we have these labels around disability, right? It seems like it's something that's separate and apart. But when you think about it, when you go to a company to work as a person that is quote unquote able bodied, they're hiring you for the position. And when you come in, all of what you need to fulfill that job is already present. Your workstation is there, you know, depending on what type of job it is that you're doing, everything is already there for you. So when we put these terms around persons with disabilities, it makes employers think that you're asking for something extra. And in a way, it can feel that way because you're not necessarily asking for something extra. You're asking for something different. So I use adaptive software on my computer, a screen reader that talks to me. So an adaptation in the workplace for me would be that the employer would need to purchase that particular software and load it up onto one of the computers. And so I think the other kind of barrier sometimes is that when they think of the reasonable accommodation, they think of it as something additional, as opposed to just thinking of it as part of the hiring practice overall. If I were hiring somebody else, then they would have their workstation, they would have their computer, they would have their van, they would have their whatever it is that they need in order to accomplish the job.
Lisa, I just also wanted to add that some very good piece of advice that was shared with me by Sherry is also, we cannot expect people to know or employers to know what person's needs are, and so you have to be in a comfortable place to even share what those needs are. Um, because if you need a particular tool or accommodation to assist you with your work, and I'll just use one that we use commonly every day. I mean, we use spell check to assist us with writing
Mhm.
documents.
Hmm.
uh, is one example, but we also must speak up to share what those tools would be to assist persons with getting their particular work done. But then there are also other things, especially when we talk about barriers to persons with getting employees. Number one, I think, is fear, right? So
Hmm.
not employers not knowing what to expect. And so again, that is a conversation, whether it's through the employee or through someone, an advocate who can assist someone on their behalf. It's always helpful to have that element as well. But that would be a barrier. Really, is not being able to. It's not sharing the information that you need to be able to do your job successfully. There are people who are in the office who need help with just a hearing device to amplify the sound. Simple tools like that, which will make a difference in the workplace. That's just a couple of examples.
Hmm.
I also just wanted to jump in and I just wanted to make an important clarifying point about Bermuda's legislation. Bermuda's human rights laws aim to protect individuals from discrimination based on disability. This includes the right to reasonable accommodation, equal opportunities, equal pay, and protection against retaliation for asserting one's rights. So it's important to recognize that Bermuda's human rights laws, the Human Rights Act, provides very sound protection for persons with disabilities.
Hmm.
And I think it's important that, again, reinforcing what the minister said, it is an interactive conversation. It's an interactive process with the employer, and this may include providing documentation of the disability, specifying the nature of the accommodation requested, and participating in discussions about how the accommodation can be implemented without causing undue hardship to the employer. So again, I just wanted to reinforce that point.
Thank you. Just gonna do one more question, and before we get to Mr. Keefe, what are some best practices for employers to consider in accommodating persons with disabilities in the workplace? Whether it's at the interviewing stage, like what type of questions, or any type of courses or anything like that. I can leave it open so everyone don't speak at once.
I would say really it is communication. Just the same way that you are communicating with an employee about a performance appraisal, or communicating with an employee about some awesome job that they did in representing the organization. It is having a conversation with the individual to simply explore how can I be of assistance to ensure that you can do your job effectively.
And
I
I would add to that, that remember, like, we're all people. So it's not always necessary to draw like these lines of distinction, depending, again, we're talking about a spectrum, right? Depending on the disability, you operate with your employees all in a similar way. So what you're adapting in your, like, using like a, a job review or appraisal, you might be adapting some of the categories or maybe some of the questions based on what type of work that person with a disability is doing. But I think generally speaking, we're all people. And when I come in for an interview, I used to be really scared to go to interviews. And when I first finished with my education, I remember my first internship interview that I went to. I actually walked into the room, and when the interviewer came in and said good afternoon, the first thing I said is, "I'm blind." And she kind of giggled and she said, "Okay." And then went on with the interview. And at the end of it is when she said to me, she said, Sherry, I kind of already knew, but it wouldn't have been a thing. You made it a thing. And so sometimes, when we isolate people based on their disability, then it creates a barrier even inside the person about what they're going to expect from an employer in terms of when they're actually in the workforce. I just think keeping our humanity at the center and then governing, yourself accordingly, based on how you treat all of your employees.
I'd just like to add that it's a collaborative conversation as well.
Hmm.
Don't try to assume what they would need. Um, we had someone here at Workforce Development that had a disability, and we used to have conversation all the time with regards to the accommodations. So, a touch screen for their computer because they weren't able to use the keyboard, making sure that we had automatic doors to accommodate for the wheelchair, adjusting the desk so that it was high enough for them to sit comfortably at the desk. When you talk about it, it sounds very, very simple, but it meant the world to the individual because it meant that they could come to work in comfort. And also, we fostered a community here where everyone supported and assisted during lunch times and things like that. It was always someone that was there to assist. There was a running joke about the ladies having to get his tea in the afternoons, but that was just something that everyone did. So for employers, I would say to make sure that you're fostering an inclusive work environment and also
Hmm.
collaborating with the individual, and also, as Lisa said, communicating and having those conversations, open and honest conversations, as you would with a performance appraisal, so that and ask questions, so that you can educate yourselves on what is actually needed.
Thank you. I like that you touched on keeping humanity at the heart of it because that's really where it starts, right? So that the
Yeah.
empathy can flow. So now that those questions have been asked, we are going to let Mr. Keith Simmons have his moment to shine. I'll unmute your mic for you, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Everybody has sort of touched on a few points that I wanted to speak about, but I would like to go way back to 2007. We had a document that went to Parliament, a recommendation for a national policy on disabilities. And then that was changed to a national policy on disabilities. That document needs to be picked back up. Um, and with all the topics that everyone has spoken about, there was a section there on employment of persons with disabilities that had goals and objectives. Um, like Malika said, we've done work together, Lisa and Sherry. What you're talking about sensitivity training. Just recently, David O'Brien at the BTA with a team has put together sensitivity training, not just for hospitalities, but that can be very helpful for you. So I think right now, a number of entities need to come together: ADS, Workforce Development, Human Rights, maybe Sherry, BTA, and whoever else, to all come together and put together an educational employment program for everybody where it can be put out on CITV, YouTube, rather, and go out into employers, to the Employers Council, Chamber of Commerce, and whoever else. Because people really invite you, like Sharon said, and go out and just do PSAs or do um, programs with potential employers. Because right now it's a lot of unknown that frightens people in the community. So the more it's been put in the public, promoted, to take away the fears, I think a lot more people with disabilities would be employed. So not willing to go over everybody else.
Yeah.
If there are more questions out there, well,
Yeah.
um, we're ready here to answer. Um, just I know people's been asking, but yes, I will recently retired from Aging and Disability Services, so we have done a lot of work in promoting persons with disabilities for employment. And we actually used to go out and speak on diversity. We've done it to the banks and a lot of other places, and they will be really helpful. They will invite you back. So the word is out there.
Thank you. I have one question for the minister. What legislative plans does the government have to address some of these issues?
Thank you for that question. First, I do want to speak to one legislative initiative that was put in place many years ago, and that is the exemption of payroll tax. And so, any employer who hires anyone with disability has the exemption of payroll tax, and so that exemption is there for employers and employees with disabilities who have that particular benefit. Every day, every week, I meet with my permanent secretary. We have on our agenda Bermuda Disabilities Act, and so it is in the future. It is in the future for Bermuda for us to tackle legislation to that aspect. We have some progressive um, deadlines. So, we're looking at 2025. So we do have some work to do still. But I do just want to give hope in that aspect in regards to direction for a disability act for Bermuda.
Mm.
Thank you. And did you want to highlight? I know you're going to be giving a ministerial statement on Friday,
Mm.
but just anything to do with that national plan for persons with intellectual disabilities. And
Yes,
I
so
know, yeah.
we did launch this year the National ID Plan, which we have working groups working on the initiatives that were presented in that plan. We also will be launching a disability register so that we are able to collect information and data on the needs of our persons with disabilities in our community, and
Mhm.
hopefully link it to other initiatives for persons in our community. So you should be hearing more information and progress updates as it relates to these initiatives.
Thank you. So we're winding down to the end of today's discussion. I just want to open up to let everyone give a few closing remarks. So I don't know if you want to go back in the order that we started. We can do Lisa first and then move down the list.
Mhm.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to remind the viewers that if you feel that you have been discriminated against on the ground of your disability, you should contact the Human Rights Commission. And employers should also contact the Commission if they have a query or want to better understand their responsibilities and the duty that they have provided within the legislation. And again, I just wanted to thank my colleagues for this panel. Thank you, Minister, for convening this. I've enjoyed this greatly.
Thank you. Now we're gonna let Sasha give some remarks.
Yeah, I'll just thank you again for this opportunity to start this conversation. If I may, like Keith was saying, there's a lot of work that does need to be done, and it's not, just a government thing. There's disability related organizations. There definitely needs to be some conversations between these organizations. I'm seeing it myself being involved with so many, and there's so many plans that we all have that are similar and that, share, that can share resources. Um, if I may, based on the workplace disabilities in the workplace, there are some big events coming up. I could speak for Inspire in particular. They will be holding their symposium next year, which is also going to be on employment and disability in the workplace, as well as other organizations within themselves are working on things for their members and the like. So there's definitely things being done. And I would just say for anybody to, with a disability or a family member, to reach out for an employer, reach out and just find out if you have questions, how to do it, what you need to do. Um, the help is there. There's us here, and then there's other departments within government and other charities and nonprofits that could assist.
Thank you. And do you want to just insert a plug as to where people can find the advisory council? Like, are you on socials,
Sure.
websites?
Sure. So yes, the Disability DAC, we've been calling it Disability Advisory Council. We do have a Facebook page, which is the Disability Advisory Council, and the email address for DAC is info at what is it? It's DAC, sorry, at gov.bm, sorry.
So
And yes,
DAC at
DAC,
gov.bm.
yep, at gov.bm. And anyone could make contact that will go through to myself and we would discuss and reach out. I am also part of a few other entities as well. So I am part of Inspire Special Olympics. So I would just say there's various disability related organizations, and the majority are on Facebook. And I would say just reach out to there. We're all pretty well connected, and messages will get across to whomever to deal with whatever the concern is.
Thanks. And Lisa, for the Human Rights Commission, are you online? Can we get a little plug from you?
Absolutely. Contact us at 295-5859. Visit us on social media, Bermuda Human Rights Commission, and, and visit our website, which is humanrights.bm.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to turn over to Malika.
Yes, thank you, everyone. This has been an amazing conversation, one that I hope that we can continue into the future. Please utilize the Department of Workforce Development, as I said, as that bridge between your services and the employer. We do want to advocate for those who are finding themselves challenged with finding employment, and we can help to advocate on their behalf. So please utilize our services here at Workforce Development. If you'd like some more information, you can give us a call on 297-7714, or you can visit us on 23 Parliament Street. We'd be happy to see you and to put you on your journey to sustainable employment so that you can be independent and take care of yourselves and your families.
Thank you. And we're going to now turn it over to you, Sherry.
Yeah. Again, thank you, Minister and panelists. Yeah, this was a good start. I'm really, really, really so excited that we are kind of really coming into this topic. And Sasha alluded to our upcoming symposium, which is the third Saturday in April, if I'm not mistaken. It's the 20th, and I'm hoping that in the next week or so, when each of you that are on the panel today receive our invitation, that you show up, because that is what Keith has alluded to in terms of our collaboration and coming together. And I'm very proud of Inspire's ability to just, that's our heart, is to pull everyone into these spaces where we can share and help to grow the work of around disabilities in Bermuda. So please do respond, and we're working on really shaping this into a very kind of robust process for businesses and also for individuals when they attend the symposium. I also want to say that, of course, you heard me talking a lot about legislation. It was no at all jab at our human rights. I'm glad we have something. We have a pretty thorough piece of legislation written into our human rights law. But the legislation that we are looking at is broader and really addresses all domains of life of the person that is living in the island with a disability. So I get so excited every time I hear the minister kind of refer to these things. Even the registry was something that we pushed out and put forward and requested. And so it's exciting to hear these things are coming into being. So I actually want to congratulate Bermuda. Like, we have a long way to go, but we are doing the work. All of us are doing the work that are working in this particular space. So thank you guys so much for all that you put in, from the Human Rights Commission to workforce development to DAC, and on and on and on, right? So just, just let's keep pressing forward. Let's really, come together and recognize that together we'll get things done faster.
Thank you. And for those who are interested in keeping up with Inspire, can you let us know where we can find you?
Sure. Yeah. Currently, we do have a Facebook page, just Inspire Bermuda. Um, our email address is going to change soon, but until it does, right now it's Inspire Bermuda at mail, no G, Inspire Bermuda at mail.com. When that changes, it will be to a Gmail, and we'll make sure that we connect the old email with the new email. But you can reach us in those two ways.
Thank you. And Keith, did you have any closing words for us?
I just like to say I like to see more collaboration, and it will make it better for everybody, because I'm gonna say something that a lot of people are not gonna like. But with my experience in the last 20 years in government, there's some organizations and individuals, as long as they get what they want, they're happy and they disappear until they need
Hmm.
it next time, and then they come back. Everybody sticks together and works together will be better for everybody. And disabilities will be able to move forward in the middle. That's what I like to say.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you. Minister, I'm going to let you have some closing remarks.
Yes, absolutely. I do want to thank any employer out there that embraces inclusivity, um, because there are living examples of that. And I just want to thank you for being fearless. I want to thank you for just communicating and finding out what is needed and giving opportunity. I also want to thank the panelists today for the information that they imparted on our community. I think it's very important that we continue to keep up with this awareness, um, in helping our community to understand what disability looks like in the workplace. And also, I want to encourage our community to use the resource of the Human Rights Commission. They are a resource, and there is the human rights legislation that is out there to protect persons against discrimination. So please continue to um, be aware of that particular resource. And I just want to let the organizations that are out there that are working to support persons with disabilities, I want to say that I thank you. I see you. I do see progress. It is, somebody mentioned already that it is not just government alone that can help to progress initiatives, um, but it is us as a whole community who will, and if we want the progress, we have to do the progress, and less talking about it, but actually actioning it. So I do see you, and I see what you are doing. Thank you.
So thank you for tuning in, Bermuda. If you missed this conversation live, it will be across our social media platforms as well as on YouTube. So we just encourage you to share this with the employers in your circle, whether they be entrepreneur, corporate, or anywhere in between, and share with those in your circle that you know may have a disability, whether it's visible or invisible. Thank you and have a good day.